Welcome everybody. Thanks for tuning in to the long-term review of the Yeti SB120. So late in 2022, you might remember we did a dissected video where we had all three of the new Yeti SB bikes in the lineup: 120, 140 Lunch Ride, and the awesome new 160. In the months since that dissected came out, we've kept the bikes, put a lot more miles on them under a lot more riders. And today we're gonna share more of the ride impressions and what our takeaway impressions are of the bike over that time period. Now we'll touch a little bit on some of the specifics, but we will link the video as well as the story down below. We've got a full written review on the website as well as that dissected where we go really in depth, have interviews with Yeti engineers. So if you want to learn more about the specifics, we're going to try to keep this video a little bit shorter and focus more on impressions. So we'll link that stuff down below. Please go check it out. Now, one last thing before we get into those ride impressions. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, guys, I would be very appreciative, as would all the rest of the guys, if you joined our channel for more videos in the future. So let's get into it. So moving into Spec, obviously Yeti is, you know, a boutique higher end brand. So, you know, with the design performance, you are going to pay a little bit of a premium. I mean, it is a pretty sweet bike. We've got AXS drivetrain, locked in threaded cable capture ports, so the bike is dead silent, threaded bottom bracket, removable down tube protector, so that way you can access and get into cable routing should you need to make any changes, swap stuff out, or service things. Overall, a very nicely thought out bike, tight package. We've had the bike and beat on it for months. Nothing has come loose. Everything is still performing flawlessly. Just overall, a really awesome bike. And traditionally, I'm not one of those, you know, diehard Yeti fanboys. It seems like there are so many of them out there, and I'm not one, but this is a really awesome bike. So I'm just putting that disclaimer in there so you guys know that, like, oh, I loved a Yeti no matter how it would ride when it showed up. This bike has definitely won me over, and I think it's won over a lot of the guys in our crew, especially for being a 120 bike. You know, like, this was just not something we were expecting to like this much. As you could guess by the name, it is a 120 mil rear wheel travel bike with a 130 mil fork up front. Price range goes from $6,300 up to $12,100. There's two different carbon fiber materials used. You've got either the C spec frames or the Turk or T series frames. The T series frame, we have a T3 here. They are a bit more expensive. However, they use a much higher quality, AKA more expensive carbon, so the strength to weight ratio drops, meaning you get a lighter bike. About 225 grams is roughly what Yeti is claiming is the weight savings on a frame set there. So let's get into some real quick info on the bike here. It's a size large. Most of our riders, I'm 5'11", most of our guys were from 5'10" to about 6'1". So we passed this around to a few of the guys and everyone felt pretty confident and comfortable on the size. So a couple of the key Geo numbers on this size large is the 475 reach, 66.5 degree head tube angle, and 76.5 degree seat tube angle. Seat stay lengths do change by 2 millimeters per size. Also, the carbon layup and structure changes per size, so that extra small through double extra large riders will have kind of an optimum amount of carbon and layup to maximize that weight to stiffness ratio. Now, flashing back to that dissected and the interviews we had with the Yeti team, refinement was the name of the game with this bike. They regularly told us death by 1,000 paper cuts is the goal, right? Like, there were so many little things. There wasn't just one major transformative thing. And one of the key areas they made some changes here is to the rear triangle and the suspension kinematic package. It still remains with their Switch Infinity linkage. It's a 4-bar suspension platform with a transitioning main pivot location. There's a shuttle and 2 Fox Kashima manufactured sliders. Yeti did work to improve the durability, the longevity, and the serviceability. They've changed materials so that sensitivity, the suppleness off the top is noticeably improved. Good news for older generation Yeti owners, this is a rearward facing retrofit, so if you want to upgrade, you can do that. So head to Yeti's website and check that out. At this price point, the G2 brakes are a little bit of a letdown. You know, traditionally we're not big fans of the G2 brakes. We find them pretty undergun on everything, and that would include this 120, 130 bike. You know, there are some things you could do, put you know, thicker rotors on there, different brake pads, but even still, there's not a huge weight penalty to upgrade to a slightly nicer brake, and for 8,300 bucks, I think that would have been nice. Other notable features are more ground clearance up front, 25 to 30 millimeter higher clearance at the bottom of the kind of down tube just in front of the threaded bottom bracket, which is a nice addition. Plenty of room for a water bottle and cage. Overall, a much sleeker, slimmer, and stiffer performing bike. Again, a lot more of hardware, frame alignment, time and care has been put into making this bike stiff, and that is going to translate to ride impressions, which we're going to get into next. So this is not what I would say is a cross-country race bike. And as someone who's kind of more of like a DH guy, it's hard for me to say that a 120 bike isn't an XC race bike, because, like, you know, in my little pea brain, anything with that short travel must be an XC bike. It is not. It is a very fun, well-rounded trail bike. And if you go to Yeti's website, you'll see that, you know, they even poke fun a little bit and say, let the other guys come up with clever names to reword cross country, just hit the trail and let the definition speak for itself. So in so many words. And this bike absolutely did that. Again, we don't spend a ton of time riding short travel bikes, but we've been getting on more and more of them. And every time we ride them, they're just so much fun, right? A lot of the trails that we have here in Bend are much better suited to these shorter travel trail bikes. And there are some things that might be confusing to some riders looking at this bike, and there are some aspects of this bike that I think will pull from two very different audiences and make this a pretty ideal candidate, I think. And those two audiences are, I think, the retired XC race guy. Someone who wants a snappy, precise, quick handling bike. They don't want a sluggish, doggish, over-traveled bike, but they maybe want something that's a little smoother and plusher than what they've been riding and racing on for so many years. The flip side is you've got your like aggressive enduro kind of guy who maybe only has a 160 bike and realizes that, you know, over half the time that he's out riding, that bike is way too much and he's overgunned and always off the back wishing for a faster rolling bike. That is kind of where we fall into the spectrum of things. And I think this bike is really well suited for that type of rider as well. I think the one area that those riders may find a little bit of a shortcoming is with that 66.5-degree head tube angle. You know, I know our crew really enjoyed how snappy, fast, and playful the bike handles and how maneuverable it is, but there also is a limit that you hit that's not just related to the travel, but more so that steep head tube angle when it gets to really steep, gnarlier, chunkier terrain, which the bike is more than willing to go through. And, you know, maybe we're pushing it kind of that upper end, but I think a lot of riders out there wouldn't mind at least a half, but probably a full degree slacker head tube angle. But then again, your XC guys are gonna probably be a little bummed about that. And there is a ton of slack, aggressive, short travel trail bikes on the market. So maybe Yeti was smarter than we are and offering a bike that kind of fits into that middle area and not chasing that super aggressive, slack, short travel bike. Nevertheless, it's a sweet bike all around. So climbing performance, it's solid. It's not amazing. It's not like an absolute rocket ship with the shock open. We typically, you know, ran the shock with a little less sag than what Yeti suggested, just to try to stiffen it up a little and give a little bit more progression and a little bit more support for a lot of the bermy, pushy, pumpy trails that we have. And even still, with a little bit less sag and a little more air pressure in the shock, we noticed that the shock did move a little bit, especially on flatter, like lower grade climbs where you're pedaling harder. When it got a little steeper, for some reason, it seemed like that maybe just that extra weight loading the shock kept it a little bit more stable. But good news is the shock lever is very easy to reach, so it's not too hard to reach down there and put that thing into the trail mode and have a nice enhancement to that pedal platform. The flip side is this bike has much better small bump sensitivity and compliance than older Yetis we've ridden, especially for a 120 bike, right? You can't really hide any hang up or hiccup in the suspension kinematic or the platform, and this bike doesn't really have any of those issues, which is rad. With the 130 travel up front, we were still able to hit some pretty sizable jumps, send this thing off of drops, you know, 5, 6, 7 feet, you know, as long as there's a decent transition or your ankles are feeling up to it. But, you know, if you're doing that every day, probably would rather be on the 140. But, you know, if every once in a blue moon you're gonna go send it on a trail, this thing's more than willing and more than capable of doing it. But this bike loves to go fast. Our riders were setting PRs up and down, more so on the downs because it was carrying speed so much better than a lot of the other bikes that we test and ride. Like I said, it is a good climber, but I wouldn't say it's like, I don't know, like a specialized epic, right? Like that sort of a pure race hardtail or a BMC that's like a pure race bike. But I would also much rather have one of these for my everyday riding. So big takeaways for us, a solid pedaling bike, not the fastest, most efficient, but it'll definitely get the job done and it'll do it well. Really impressive improvement to the suspension capabilities. It is smooth, it's supple, it handles well, has a nice platform, and it's a short travel bike that you can still push and send really hard. At 30 pounds with pedals, it certainly isn't the lightest, you know, XC bike out there on the market, but I would definitely say it might be one of the most capable and well-rounded. The frame stiffness is there, so if you're a heavier rider or someone who wants to push it hard and slam that thing into corners and ride it like it's a 140 bike, it'll hold up. Overall, I think Yeti's just done a really good job. Like I said, a number of price points available. You got a frame set offering. So yeah, as far as we're concerned, 2 solid thumbs up on the 120. If you're looking for a 120, 130 bike, this is definitely something that's worth putting on your radar and taking a look or a test ride if you could. Yeah, other than brakes and maybe your rear tire, honestly, would probably be our only 2 real criticisms on an otherwise stellar bike. So once again, before you guys go, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel. We'd love to see you back in future videos. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you out on the trails.